Brian, over to you, dude.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, David. Great to see you in service there, mate. Thank you, Emma, as well. My name is Brian. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for filling in for the last 2 weeks as well, Chris. I've only got listened to one of the recordings. I think you've only published one of them, haven't you? Have you got two? Okay, get the other one up. The one that I listened to was excellent, so thank you very much for taking the time to invest in learning this stuff from the perspective of being able to share it with other people. Isn't that a nice thing? And might it be said that, whenever we sponsor folks through the 12 steps, we as individual sponsors learn more about the 12 steps and we're able to grow with that. And certainly I am very grateful to Belfast Recovery Group for giving me the privilege of going back through these 12 principles, i.e. the 12 traditions, to give me the opportunity to get re-emerged back into this work and to be more familiar with it as well, and to look at the context over again and the context around which each of these traditions were written. So that helps me to be of greater service to Alcoholics Anonymous, in particular Belfast Recovery Group. So thank you. And I guess that, I don't know, I was driving for work today and I was thinking about this evening's meeting, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to shock everybody by coming in with a more optimistic beginning. And yeah, I just couldn't find words of optimism. And because I don't want to, because I don't want to deny the problem. In the same way that my sponsor did not deny the problem from which I was suffering whenever we were on step one of the 12 steps. He didn't fill me full of this childish optimism of it'll be okay and bollocks. He gave me the reality of the hopelessness of the condition that is alcoholism. And from that place of recognizing hopelessness and recognizing that defeat, that caused a vacuum that allowed a force to come into play that to this day I cannot define, nor do I try to. So yeah, I guess that, I suppose humility isn't something that comes naturally to me. You all gasp with surprise. But nonetheless, the humility that I had to find in order to recover from alcoholism began with understanding the grave nature of the problem. Was it the same for you? I guess so, because you're all still here. And then the power of God, whatever that means, stepped in, and here we are. And I wonder, and I hope I'm right about this, Chris, because the last few weeks of this workshop has been a gamble where I'm, working on the basis that I must be right about this, because surely spiritual truths and laws are universal and they're not just designed to pull me out of a drunken hole. And that being the case, I think it's important to talk about the hopelessness of the condition. And from that place of defeat, we can then rely on spiritual principles in order to pull us out of it, because that worked for me, right? So if something works for me, I tend to do it again. I have a t-shirt that I really, really like that I've got 6 different colors, because I put it on and thought I look amazing in that. Slight exaggeration. So rather than buy different ones, I just buy more of the same things. I'm a very, very simple, blunt object. If something works for me, I look for ways to replicate that, because I work on the theory that if it worked with this, it'll work with that. Right? So if it is the case that Alcoholics Anonymous is on its knees, that we say things in rooms that potentially could cause people to commit suicide rather than get well, we talked about this a few weeks ago. If we find that we've deviated so far away from our traditions that at a business meeting is very unusual for to see someone even speak about our traditions, then maybe we could call that pretty fucked. If it is the case that it's very unlikely that you walk into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and hear the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that Alcoholics Anonymous? No. So we refer back to my friends, the National Association of Stamp Collectors, who may or may not exist, that if you walk into one of their meetings, which I presume they have, if they exist, and you want to talk about your collection of Def Leppard records, and they're saying, well, why would we want to do that? We talk about stamps, jackass. Whereas, if I'm looking at the screen and see all you big book thumpers. I'm sure you've had experience where you go in to AA meetings to talk about AA, and you are considered to be the purveyor of controversy because you've upset the apple cart in their shit ass room where they're talking about their problems and helping nobody. And you turn up and talk about AA, and you're the bad guy and you're the center of controversy. Anybody experience that? Anybody experience where you're trying to help somebody work through the 12-step program and then they come back saying they're listening to some jackass at a meeting down the street who's been sober 900 years and has never had to work a step in his life and telling you waste. And you guys experience that? You know what I mean, Roseanne, right? Like, how irritating is that? How irritating is that for me as the sponsor? What about the poor bastard I'm trying to help is going to probably die because of it? Reminding us that we're in the savings of lives business. Can we all unify? Can we all get on the same page? My friend Anne from down the road, if somebody I'm sponsoring phones up Anne with a bit of a dilemma, I'm pretty sure she's going to give them the same kind of stuff I'm going to give them because she's sponsored in the same way. And my friend Elaine over in Edinburgh, I know that she's sponsored in a similar way. I think you guys are the same sponsor, actually, come to think of it. But nonetheless, the point being that shouldn't matter. You should be able to walk into any AA room and have a level of consistency. Maybe that's too much to ask. Well, certainly that was what the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous asked. And yet again, I'm going to go back into a wee bit of the history and do a bit of a recap as to the purpose of the 12 traditions as I understand it from the literature. And we're looking up forward to the second edition again, which I often describe as a whistle-stop tour of the history of AA. So if you can't be bothered reading AA Comes of Age, which I suggest you do, and you fancy just getting a quick run through, the forward to the second edition is pretty good. I was reading it with somebody yesterday who is a sponsor, as part of our sponsorship lineage. We go through the forwards because it's important to understand the history because it brings context. Context is a word we'll discuss more later on. But what we're looking at here is this stage where you've got Bill Wilson, Bob Smith, a couple of good lads come together. Both had recovered from alcoholism using, loosely speaking, what went on to be the 12 steps. And then they sponsor somebody else and they sponsor somebody else. And there's a bunch of lads and they're all doing their best. And, they're helping people and their fellowship's grown. Then there's a handful of folks. And, one guy up the road's doing it one way, another guy down the road's doing it slightly different. And, that's fine. There's no rules as such, but they get together and they put their combined experience together. They put it into a book. They call it Alcoholics Anonymous. The fellowship is named after the book. You can't really get that wrong because you got a fucking book with the name and the instructions in it. But just whenever you think that that's the perfect model being, I don't need to worry about my new friend Billy doing the program different to my old friend Norma because we're all using the same book. So that would make sense, right? But what happened was something that they didn't predict. People started reading the damn thing. And some of those people were people like Jack Alexander, the reporter in the Saturday Evening Post, who wrote this really compelling article about Alcoholics Anonymous that loads of people flooded into Alcoholics Anonymous, and this bunch of lads doing the best they can, getting by with a wee tiny office and doing what they can. All of a sudden there's freaking loads of them and they're springing up everywhere. Not everybody knew you were supposed to read the damn book. Some people were, I don't know, using it as a book stopper or a doorstop or whatever. And but then there was like, some people thought, wouldn't it be cool if we do it along with the Bible or whatever? Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with the Bible, but it wasn't the purpose of the meeting. And then there was this disunity, and then there was different rules set up for one meeting than there was for another meeting. It all just got to be a bit chaotic. Reading from Roman numerals 18, XVIII, is 18, right? Our society then at the bottom then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this. Could these large number of erstwhile erratic, beg your pardon, alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Any of that sound familiar? Because I see that shit everywhere. Everywhere now. Soon AA was beset by these very problems, and on every side and in every group. Okay, so that was the problem as they seen it. There was this massive mushrooming process. The organization, if you like, became so much bigger than they could handle. So this mushrooming process brought chaos. To have the book with a level of consistency was one thing, but then there's these meetings happening, and it was inconsistent and it lacked unity. And then all those problems that it listed there were happening, just like we see today. But their response to that was, but out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. Isn't that bad news? Imagine dying, that'd be shit. So we have to hang together or die. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. So then it goes on to list what essentially is the 12 traditions as we know them today. They're called something else then, it doesn't matter. So I guess the main point of that is that they were shitting themselves. It's like, this is not good. They were getting a blue light response to the problem. Whereas I see the same problems in most places today with this indifference to it. No, this is not the way we do it. And this nonsensical, not give a fuckedness about the problem and the extent to which it has got to be a problem. We had to unify our fellowship, or AA would pass off the scene, was the prediction. Now, I was doing a workshop like this in Edinburgh a few years ago, and somebody sent me an email afterwards going, Well, you're wrong, weren't you? Because AA didn't pass off the scene. And I was reading it thinking, the poor person thinks that AA is still here. That's really tragic. AA passed off the scene decades ago. And what I now see is small grassroots elements of Alcoholics Anonymous within this larger organization. But with there being a probability of not getting an AA message in AA rather than the opposite. So if that is an AA passing off the scene, I don't know how bad it needs to be. Do we just keep it going even though it's shit and say, well, AA isn't passed off the scene? Or do we continue to try and find ways to bring the value back into the organisation that was decided upon by the founding members of Alcoholics Anonymous, who wrote the bloody thing down so we couldn't muck it up, and set a set of traditions in place that at our meetings we can stay robust and steadfast to the programme of Alcoholics Anonymous? I favour the latter. I guess you guys do too. You wouldn't be here after all these weeks. Glad you're still here, because again, these things get really lonely after a while. It's like loads of people turn up on day one. What do we get on day one, Chris? Was it 85 or something? What are we down to now? 42. That's pretty good. The last time we did this, it disappeared much more rapidly than that. I don't know. Maybe people are being switched on to the idea that this is a good thing. Maybe. I don't know. I don't think I'd listen to me for 10 weeks either. So for those who didn't stick around, it's okay. I get it. All right. So how do we unify around the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous? What might that look like? All right, let's see if I can. Oh yeah, Chris, can you give me the keys? Have you done that already? Yeah, okay, got it. Thank you, sir. So if you have a look at this little graphic here, you guys can see that, right? The bookends. Yeah. Okay. So if you view the 12 traditions like they were books on a shelf, they might look a bit like this, and we have them color coded here because they exist within these different categories if you wish to look at it that way. And you'll notice that tradition 1 and 12 are color coded the same because we're looking at them within the same category. We looked at them together on the first night, maybe the second night, maybe the third night actually. Because what we have here is tradition 1. Why? What are we doing all this for? What is the purpose? What is the desired outcome? The desired outcome is we had to unify our fellowship or pass off the fucking scene. The desired outcome is unity. And the method by which we do that, the how, is in tradition 12, by anonymity. What does that mean? The placing of principles before personality. It doesn't mean anonymity in the sense of like withholding your name or what I would describe as privacy probably. We'll talk a bit about that next week. But in this context, that's not what it means. What it means is the placing the principles before personalities. What does that mean? That means that I'm not really important. Who gives a shit about what I think? I guess if anybody wants to phone me up and ask me something, then hopefully I will see it as my job for to say, well, my experience and my understanding of the tradition that you're looking for is this, that, or the other, rather than, yeah, bloody hell, I think this and I think that. Can we bring it back to the traditions? That's placing the principles before my personality. And my personality is such where I've got an opinion on bloody everything. But that doesn't belong here. We're going to expand on that more later on. But it's the placing of principles before personality. So as we look at every tradition every week, I want to have a look at this seesaw effect. How does that tradition help us to unify by placing principles before personality? Each tradition should have that element to it. We're able to see that with authority. We're able to see that with membership, with the autonomy that comes from the beauty of autonomy, that whenever the autonomy of tradition 4 is combined with the unity of tradition 1, i.e. the program of recovery, you then have the group has its primary purpose. Isn't that wonderful? The customs added to the primary purpose. We've already talked about the tradition 6 and around money never endorsing, about staying poor. We talked about contributions to AA. Let's not skimp. Let's not skimp on what we contribute to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and what we put into the hat, because our fellowship relies upon it. We had a chat about some numbers. I got some feedback from some people after that one. Not all of it was complimentary. That's okay. And my good friend Chris has then spent the last couple of weeks talking about non-professional and never organised. I was able to hear the never organised one, but I haven't heard the non-professional one yet, so I look forward to hearing that, Chris. But you did an excellent job. Thank you so much. Are you doing this workshop next, Chris? Done.
Maybe.
Okay, I hope you are. I hope you are, because I found you much more pleasant to listen to than listen to my chirpy voice. So, would not be amazing. But if it's not you, I'm sure the group will pick somebody excellent. All right, fair enough. So tonight we're going to talk about tradition 10, which is which is a fun one. Okay, maybe that's why I got you to do the last two ones, Chris, because they're boring, and I just keep the fun ones for me. Okay, let's see if we can have some fun with this one. So, tradition 10 in the short form. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. So, you'd thought I would have set this up, but before the meeting, there was a lady here present at the meeting, asked me something about Cocaine Anonymous, to which I replied, I have no opinion. I do have an opinion, but I have to button it, and I have no opinion. I'm in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So that was an example of where I could find myself easily drawn into having an opinion that is outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. The long form of the same tradition reads, our AA experience has taught us that no AA group or member should ever, in such a way as to implicate AA, express any opinion on outside controversial issues, particularly those of politics, alcohol reform, or sectarian religion. The Alcoholics Anonymous groups oppose no one concerning such matters. They can express no views whatever. Right, okay. So, I sometimes think that if we were to do a traditions workshop where we had to rattle through them all quite quickly, I would be able to do tradition 10 quite quickly by saying, just don't talk about any shit other than AA. That's kind of it. It really is, it really is as simple as that. Like, there's nothing complicated about this tradition. And okay, well, let's read from the literature anyway, because I'm not going to get away with just coming out with one statement and then go and put my feet up. So let's have a look at Language of the Heart on page 89. So it's page 89 on that version of it. I think there's another version where the page numbers are slightly skew with, where it goes into tradition 10 with a wee bit more substance than what I was trying to get away with. So it says, to most of us, Alcoholics Anonymous has become as solid as the Rock of Gibraltar. We like to believe that it will soon be as well known and just as enduring as this historical landmark. We enjoy this pleasant conviction because nothing has yet occurred to disturb it. We reason that we must hang together or die, hence we take for granted our continued unity as a movement. But should we? Though God has bestowed upon us great favours, and though we are bound by stronger ties of love and necessity than most societies, is it prudent to suppose that automatically these great gifts and attributes shall be ours forever? If we are worthy, we shall probably continue to enjoy them. The real question, how shall we always be worthy of our present blessings? Seen from this point of view, our AA traditions are those attitudes and practices by which we may deserve as a movement a long life and a useful one. To this end, no one can be more vital than our 10th tradition, for it deals with a subject of controversy, serious controversy. On the other side of the world, millions have died even recently in religious dissension. Other millions have died in political controversy. The end is not yet. Nearly everybody in the world has turned reformer. Each group, society, nation is saying to the other, you must do as we say or else. Political controversy and reform by compulsion have reached an all-time high, and eternal, seemingly, are the flames of religious dissension. This is written in 1944, but all feels very current, doesn't it? Some might say. Being like other men and women, how can we expect to remain forever immune from these perils? Probably we shall not. At length we must meet them all. We cannot flee from them, nor ought we try. If these challenges do come, we shall, I am sure, go out to meet them gladly and unafraid. This will be the acid test of our worth. Our best defence? This surely lies in the formation of a tradition respecting serious controversy so powerful that neither the weakness of person nor the strain of life or of our troubled times can harm Alcoholics Anonymous. We know that AA must continue to live, or else many of us and many of our fellow alcoholics throughout the world will surely resume the hopeless journey to oblivion. That must never be. And though by some deep and compelling instinct we have thus far avoided serious controversies, save minor and healthy growing pains, we are at peace among ourselves. And because we have thus far adhered to our sole aim, the whole world regards us favourably. May God grant us wisdom and fortitude ever to sustain an unbreakable unity. It's interesting that the purpose of Tradition 10 and having no opinion on controversy and outside controversial issues is back to this point of maintaining unity. You know, you might think that it might be good to have an opinion on, I don't know, the latest drink driving laws or whatever. But who cares what you think? Who cares what I think? Because the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous and this particular principle is saying to me that I have no opinion. Now, Chris, we've been friends for a while. You know that I might have an opinion or two. And we didn't know each other whenever I was drinking alcohol and or whenever you were. But I wonder were you a wee bit like me, where I would have sat in the bar and I would have had an opinion on absolutely everything. So as a twice divorcee, I would have give you expert advice on how to maintain a romantic relationship. Despite the fact that my life would prove that that's not a subject around which I have to be given advice. I could give advice on the economy in Chile. So I picked that at random because that's something I know nothing about. But, you know, if you get me with a couple of pints of Guinness in my local pub, I would have had a very, very strong opinion and would want to argue about it. So that's who I am, left unchecked. And I've said before that I believe that the 12 traditions are designed to protect you from me. They're not just me. They didn't write it for me all those years ago, but they write it for people for me. Maybe the outspoken, bombastic type of individual whose opinions can come to the forefront, you know, is most protected by Tradition 10. I think the same could be said for the shy, retiring type who doesn't say anything. But nonetheless, the point is the traditions are there to protect oneself from oneself and the organisation from the individual who has these opinions. So opinions on what kind of thing? Well, you know, it touched on a few of them in the article there, but, you know, what about matters to do with politics? And, you know, I don't know, there was, some might say an interesting election happened in the United States as of recent, and it was at meetings where that was discussed, you know, when sharing and discussed before and after the meeting. And And I was to say, oh yeah, my story about alcoholism is this, and I think, you probably ought to vote for somebody. Like, it's not a real obvious one. As I'm saying that, everybody knows that that's controversial. Surely you know that we shouldn't be doing that in Alcoholics Anonymous. What about things like religious viewpoints? You know, let me see. There's two people on this meeting who I think know what my spiritual belief system is. Why do the rest of you not know? Because I don't talk about it. I talk about the necessity for to have this spiritual experience stroke awakening that the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about. And I talk about the method by which I find that or found out with through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I often, where it is appropriate, then talk about the 11th step would have me go off and expand that elsewhere, and that's what I went off to do. But I don't talk about what that is. Like, I've been to many meetings where I've walked out thinking, that was a meeting that I felt had a leaning towards a particular religion, because of the depth of the sharing suggested as such. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those religions. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any particular path that someone would choose. What I'm saying is, around that issue, I have no opinion. No opinion whatsoever. The book Alcoholics Anonymous talks about these are matters for the individual to decide for themselves. Whatever the individual decides for themselves is amazing, but whenever we're in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, what we're doing is we're turning up for the benefit of the newcomer who reasonably may feel that if I don't adopt that religious viewpoint, I don't belong here. Wouldn't that be a massive fail? And it's like the other one that was mentioned there is matters of a medical nature, and I think on Tradition 6 we talked about the story that we experienced, and there was a lady in our group who was very unwell and eventually decided to go to rehab, and a bunch of guys tried to persuade her not to go to rehab, and it's like, why is everybody getting involved in this matter to do with the medical? Like, the most that we could say there was, you may well wish to take advice from your doctor. I hear people talking about sponsors asking them what medication they're on, and turn up with your bottle so I can see what like, what the fuck? In what world are we supposed to be getting involved with things like that? Well, Tradition 10 says that we ought not to. A few months ago, and I can't remember the source from which it came, but you get involved in these little WhatsApp groups, and maybe you guys don't, but I do, and I can't seem to pluck up the courage to leave some of them. But there's one in which I was invited to attend a meeting that was for people who also take medication who are members of Alcoholics Anonymous so that they don't feel uncomfortable talking about the medication that they take. And I was like, what the fuck? Why would you be talking about the medication that you take in Alcoholics Anonymous? You go to Alcoholics Anonymous to talk about the book Alcoholics Anonymous and the way in which I recovered from working that program to the benefit of the newcomer. We don't need to have a special meeting that talks about a controversial outside issue as defined by Tradition 10. How do we get so far off the mark where we actually arrange to have a meeting whose title tells the attendant that we deliberately intend to violate Tradition 10 tonight? Isn't that absurd? So, in the meetings, I guess it's relatively straightforward, in terms of those things. We all know reasonably that a controversial issue may well be those subjects, but I guess you can see how easy those things could slip in. But what other things are outside issues? What other things are outside controversial issues? Well, I don't know. Like, who is there to police the line at which it becomes controversial? If somebody's offended by something, is it controversial by default? I don't know. I think that the traditions and the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous are written in such a way where there should be no individual who's there to police anything. It just seems to me just so simple that we just don't talk about anything other than Alcoholics Anonymous. So, like, what about individual techniques? So something that I heard quite a lot in my early days of going to AA meetings, and I haven't heard for quite a while actually, where a few guys had said consecutively that it's a very, very good idea to start writing gratitude lists. And now I'm not expressing an opinion here tonight either way, whether a gratitude list is a good idea or not. It may well be a wonderful idea. Some people may well do that and have the biggest load of bliss and joy in the world, and for that I'm delighted. But there's nowhere in the book Alcoholics Anonymous that says to do that. So if I want to do something like that in my own spare time, in my free time, that's fine. But I don't talk about those things in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. What about the part where we talk about meditation? Like, we used to do a traditions meeting, and on traditional 11 night, the wheels fell off because there's all these people would turn up talking about the different forms of Eastern meditation they engage in, most of which sounded pretty cool for what it's worth. Not that I have an opinion on it, but the meditations of Alcoholics Anonymous are the ones on page 86 and 87 of the book. So whenever I'm talking about traditional 11 meditations, I talk about those particular ones. Is transcendental meditation a good idea? I have no opinion on that. Now, I have a very strong opinion on that, but in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have no opinion. Now, can you see how all of this thinking brings us closer to the point of unity? Because if I go to Lorraine's meeting and they're all saying that the meditation should be, I don't know, around the Prayer of St. Francis, and if I'm going to Nikki's meeting where they're saying, oh no, it's transcendental meditation, and I go to Dagny's meeting, which is a blinder that says, hang on a second here, we're freaking Alcoholics Anonymous, it says that on the door. We talk about the meditations in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's three different things happening there, and they all speak to disunity around one particular subject. I'll go back to that very, very simple summary of sometimes whenever I look at Tradition 10, I just think that I could share too much on this because the summary of we're in AA, this is when we talk about AA, I think is just the best way of putting it, isn't it? Can you see it from that angle? The history of AA talks about the perils of deviating away from, just talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was an organization that we've spoke about before that was in the recovery of alcoholism business, if you like, and that was the Washingtonians. And in Language of the Heart and in AA Comes of Age. In fact, I'll read the part from AA Comes of Age because it's shorter. We're sort of rapidly running out of time because I'm waffling and getting down tangents. But in AA Comes of Age on page 124, it reads as follows. It says, the Washingtonian Society, a movement among alcoholics which started in Baltimore a century ago, almost discovered the answer to alcoholism. At first, the society was composed entirely of alcoholics trying to help one another. The early members foresaw that they should dedicate themselves to this sole aim. In many respects, the Washingtonians were akin to AA. The membership passed the 500,000 mark, like it's friggin' huge. They had stuck to their one goal, they might have found the full answer. Instead, the Washingtonians permitted politicians and reformers, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, to use the society for their own purposes. Abolition of slavery, for example, was a stormy political issue then. Soon Washingtonian speakers violently and publicly took sides on this question. Maybe the society could have survived the abolition controversy, but it did not have the chance from the moment it determined to reform all America's drinking habits. Some of the Washingtonians became temperate crusaders. Within a few years, they had completely lost their effectiveness in helping alcoholics, and the society collapsed. So, they deviated away from their primary purpose. They became involved in all sorts of other things. Extreme things in this case. They got involved in politics or campaigning on behalf of things that were nothing to do with alcoholism. Such was the size and the power of them that they were perhaps seen as a lobby movement that might have been interesting to those wanting to gather political gain and whatever, and they collapsed. Now, the sort of problems that I see now are much more incendiary. It's not a case of, right, okay, but the group down the road has decided to team up with whatever political party. It doesn't seem as extreme as that. They just don't bother doing friggin' Alcoholics Anonymous. And instead, they have opinions on things outside of Alcoholics Anonymous, because in the absence of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, every single word that comes out of one's mouth is in violation of Tradition 1. What could be more controversial than the violation of the traditions at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? All right. So the word controversy is a very interesting one, and we've been doing this for 12 weeks, Chris, I think, give or take. And I get some feedback afterwards, and some people have my number and my email address. And thank you for those who've been complimentary, and also thank you for those who've been less than complimentary. And certainly, it could be said that some people consider this workshop to be controversial. And so, does that mean that we avoid controversy entirely? Of course, we know the answer to that. Tradition talks about outside, controversy, and I guess that we live in a strange world where the the one person in the room of 10 is often the one who is in the right, for want of a better term. So it wouldn't be unusual to turn up to an AA meeting with 30 people there and be the only person speaking about Alcoholics Anonymous, and to be considered to be the purveyor of disruption to that meeting and the one who is the source of the controversy. Do you see what I mean? Because that's considered disruptive. But I have a job to do. I made a commitment on step three. I made another commitment once I got to step 12 to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Sometimes I have to go into sordid places. I don't think it necessarily meant the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous at the time of writing, but I go to these places and I talk about Alcoholics Anonymous. And if that's controversial to the people in that room, I don't care. Because my job is not to serve people who have been there and are happy and content with the continued violation of our traditions. My job is to serve the person who may accidentally stumble into that shithole and perhaps give them a way out and give them an avenue to a meeting where they're actually going to get the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. What about within our business meetings? What does that look like? Is it controversial to be disruptive? Is it controversial for to speak up? Funny, I had a good conversation about something similar with one of our members this morning. A member of our own group who's an absolute freaking badass, who keeps asking questions and keeps challenging things, and challenged the hell out of me this morning to the point where I had to admit, you know what, I got that completely wrong. You're 100% in the right. Thank God for her. Thank God for people who are challenging, asking questions, demanding to know answers, holding the steering committee to account, holding the board of trustees to account. Thank God there's people saying, hang on a second here, you keep saying it should be like this, but then I see that that's not happening. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Is that controversial? Yeah, of course it is. Rubbing salt into the wound can often feel very, very unpleasant, but thank God for it. Our business meetings are places of healthy debate. But what we're looking for here is we're looking for debate in around the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous and the degree to which we're meeting them. Or in the case that I was speaking about this morning with this member, she was pointing out the degree to which we're not meeting them on my watch. Wasn't that a difficult thing for me to hear? Of course it was, because I turn up to this meeting every week and pontificate like I know everything. But that's the wonderful thing about this. It's important that we have healthy debate. It's important that we call each other out. It's important that we hold each other accountable. That's not the controversy we're talking about. What we're talking about is having an opinion outside of Alcoholics Anonymous, where we're expressing the views of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll talk more about that next week. But whenever I turn up at an Alcoholics meeting, I am there to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous only. Can that be controversial, though? Page 19 of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The context of this particular page, you guys all know this, is about, a wee bit of a history part, and the guys are talking about how they put their combined experience together and they decided to publish a volume where they write down the program so we can't fuck it up, unless we don't read it. And it says here, of necessity, there will have to be discussions of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. So whenever I'm at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I'm talking about my experience of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, those words have no basis for contention or argument. If you wish to find that controversial, I remind you, those books have no basis for contention or argument. The deviation away from Alcoholics Anonymous is what is controversial. And that's what we need to stop in order to hold ourselves in tight adherence to Tradition 10. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.